The warmest of greetings to you, and welcome to Happily Ever Teaching. In this podcast, we help you enthrall your learners in every subject under the sun using the best teaching method known to science, storytelling. To do this, we feature special guest educators who are passionately keen for your children to become amazing and successful human beings. I am storyteller Chip Cahoon, and with me this week is...
Toria Bono. I am a Year 4 teacher in a large junior school on the South Coast, and I am the host of the podcast Tiny Voice Talks.
And I'm Helen. I'm a teacher currently in a mixed reception Year 1 class, teaching in Buckinghamshire.
And today we are exploring learning outcomes in history with a stupendously silly folktale from Russia. You can listen to the story by downloading our sister podcast, Fables and Fairy Tales, or search our website, epictales.co.uk, for The Fish in the Forest. There you'll find a video of me telling the story that you can share with your children. And if you sign up as an Epic Educator, you'll also get a copy as an ebook or paperback illustrated by the magnificent Mario Coelho, as well as the full audiobook for you to download at any time. There are even some tips there for telling the story yourself, and a whole heap of resources to go with the lesson ideas we're about to discuss, as well as extra lesson ideas that we maybe didn't have time to fit into this podcast. Right now, though, let's conclude our discussion with Helen and Toria here, and we're finishing up with the history of the humanities. Not the history of the humanities. The humanity called history is where I meant with that. Helen, save me here. What's the history for ages 4 to 7?
Hopefully I've come up with 2 quite engaging history activities / projects. The first one is to do with shopping now and shopping then. Because, it doesn't really specify when this story is set. It's just it's a folktale that's some time ago. But in the story, there's a market. And in order to buy different items, you go to different shops. You go to the fishmonger, the baker, the butcher, which, my grandparents used to talk about. That's how they shopped before supermarkets. They go to the fishmonger, they go to the baker and a butcher. And we still have, to a certain extent, some of these shops still exist. But it would be, I think, a good opportunity to talk to children about supermarkets, which is how most people do their shopping, not everyone. And then look at how it used to be. You can get sort of black and white photos of streets in England, which is where I happen to be, with these old shop fronts on, and what shopping used to be like. And then in the early years, of course, we're going to set up a little shop role play, a little market stalls or little shops, and they're going to create the items they're going to sell using. I tend to just say to my children, what can we use to make this? And they'll go and find junk modelling, they'll find paper, they'll find scissors, they'll find glue, and they'll create something. Sometimes it very closely represents what it's meant to, and sometimes it doesn't. But for an activity like this, and with young children, I'd say it's more about their investment in it. Yeah. And then you help them to create their strings of sausages and their fish to sell. And you could link it with an art project as well, if you wanted to get them to create some high quality art rather than just random things. But then they can experience, in inverted commas, shopping in the olden days. They take their basket and they visit the different shops that they had set up themselves, and just how different it was.
I mean, it's sort of historical, but it is also maybe a geographical question as well, because I mean, like you said, we do still have markets today with some of these stalls, and they tend to be in the more rural areas here in the United Kingdom. There are some places in the world where that is still very much the norm to go to a market, isn't it? So, and I like also the fact that this is an opportunity to explain to young learners why supermarkets are called supermarkets. Because I can remember when I was a kid, I had no idea why they were called supermarkets for a long time. It was just, why don't we just call it a market? Because that's basically what it is. But no, then you realize this is one organization basically which is collecting all of the various different things that you would find at a market. So good opportunity to bring some of that disciplinary literacy in again.
There you go. I like that could then become, a history and a geography topic, just looking at markets and shopping and how it varies. And then my other little history activity is to do, I've entitled it, Who Buried the Treasure?
Always coming back to the treasure.
We like the treasure.
I think I've managed to get the treasure into most of my subject areas this story round. And one aspect of history in Key Stage 1, and I think into Key Stage 2 as well, is finding out about history. So how do we find out about the past? Using accounts, photographs, paintings, all of this. So I thought it would be a good way to set up a historical investigation for the children. So you take your treasure box, whatever treasure box you happen to have, and then this is a very adaptable activity because you could choose your historical period or your historical events that you want it to be about. So you fill the treasure box with artifacts, essentially. Artifacts that you've created, artifacts that you've printed off, diary excerpts that you've printed off. And the children have to research who buried this treasure. What made me think of it was recently I've been teaching a project on the Great Fire of London. The idea, Samuel Pepys, he buried his things that were treasured to him. Yeah. So I thought you could bury a whole host of artifacts linked to any historical time period that you wanted, really. And then the children they just use those historical skills, with your support, of course, to find out what they can from the treasure that's been buried. So that's very open-ended because you can make it what you will.
That's a great one. And I think, time capsules are such an exciting thing to explore with children, because there are so many. And online as well, you can look at so many different time capsules that have been buried and such like. And I know some schools actually opened up their time capsules that they buried many, many years ago. I'm pretty sure I put something in a time capsule when I think it was the Queen's Silver Jubilee, which really ages me. Quite frightening, actually. but it's really interesting. I think, there are so many times when we've had those time capsules and that tells you so much about that period of time. So I think that's really powerful and could be done right the way up for, into Key Stage 2. As can actually the history that you were talking about with the history of markets and the history of how we buy and sell food.
Yes, yeah. I like combining the time capsule idea with one of these things that we're often asked to do in literacy, which is, to write a letter to our future self, or even write a letter to our past self. Because if you wanted to have the year, I don't know, let's take your year group, Victoria, the year 4s, the 8 and 9-year-olds, they could write a letter to the 8 and 9-year-olds in 10 years' time, to give them some encouragement for either surviving their particular year. So yeah, it could be a fantastic way of just crossing that boundary actually through time, receiving letters from, I suppose, you'd call it, you'd actually be receiving letters from your future self if it is the year group from the past.
Yes.
I don't know, I've confused myself with timelines now, I think.
The other thing that's just popped into mind, actually, linking on from what I was saying in English about a storytelling topic, is looking at the history of storytelling. Because I know when you talked on my podcast, Chip, you basically gave me the history of storytelling that I was unaware of, and how that really came about and how that fundamentally kept humankind going. And I think that'd be a really interesting one to unpick and look at with Upper Key Stage 2, the fact that storytelling has been going on for generation after generation and has actually been so much a part of history.
Yeah, and you never know, if you do that, you might discover some extra hidden gems like the true story that Cinderella is based on.
Ooh.
Did you know that?
No.
Cinderella is based on a true story?
No.
There
we go. Well, that's a secret for another time.
Ooh.
But yeah, we're going to have to leave this one on a cliffhanger for you folks, because that's all we've got time for. And indeed, that is all we've got time for with this story. If you'd like to talk to us about anything you've heard in this podcast, or if there's a subject you are soon to teach that you'd like us to cover, you can find us on social media using @TeachHappily, or leave us a review using your favourite podcast app. Please also share this podcast with your colleagues and help us start a story-led revolution in classrooms around the world, so children everywhere can learn in a way that's effective, memorable and enjoyable all at the same time. Now, we'll be taking a short break next week while I share stories as part of my regular slot at Glastonbury Festival. But to make it up to you, I'll return with some bonus content for you, recorded out there on Worthy Farm. Then we'll be back on Tuesday the 28th of June to go on a quest for learning outcomes alongside a nervous knight and a devious dragon. Right now, though, it only remains for us to say cheerio, and we hope to hear your story soon. So, cheerio! And we hope to hear your story soon.